So we can go through the
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to, yeah, really. Hi, everybody. Can anybody hear me? We're going to be starting in the auditorium in just a minute. Tommy Coleman's talk. head in now and get a good seat.
Perfect.
Yeah, this is the second show.
and stewardship of the original homelands and territory of the Porch Band of Creek Indigenous peoples, on which Auburn University the land and its relationship and our relationship to it has many connections, I think, as we'll see tonight, to Tommy Coleman's project in Auburn. Many of you have probably seen Tommy's exhibition already, which is titled A New Nature and My Problem with the Vessel, the first exhibition in our new series called Radical Naturalism. This series, which was initiated by the Janet L. Nolan Director of Curatorial Affairs, Aaron Levi Garvey, applause for Aaron, takes as its starting point the museum's collection of work by John James Audubon and our two galleries dedicated to exploring Audubon's work. Aaron and I actually joined the museum within a month of each other, and one of our first projects together was to start to think about how we can invite contemporary artists to Auburn to think about our Audubon collection and to respond to themes of nature and the natural world that Audubon was also thinking about. Over the coming years, we will regularly invite artists to work with Auburn faculty, Auburn collections, and particularly with our close partners at the Auburn University Museum of Natural History to draw out new responses and new ways of thinking about Audubon's work. Tommy Coleman is a Florida-grown, Brooklyn-based artist who works both as an educator and also as the residency producer at the Children's Museum of the Arts in New York City. Tommy received his BFA from Cooper Union and his MFA from Yale University. His work has been exhibited and published internationally through institutions like the Museum of Art and Design in New York, the Atlanta Contemporary Home Session, Cranbrook Academy, the University of California in Los Angeles, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. His work in Auburn, which he will start to unpack for us tonight, spans, I think, 15 years. Is that right? 15 years of his practice, and includes many objects produced for this exhibition that are new, entirely new for Tommy's practice. His work is truly interdisciplinary, spanning many kinds of media. The exhibition in Auburn includes sculpture, drawings, and a sound collaboration with the artist Lefty Bay. Sound plays an important role in Tommy's work, and as I mentioned, we invited Ben Sheridan here to perform because of Tommy's connection to Ben's music and the way in which Ben's music has inspired Tommy's practice. Later this summer, 2 additional performances will happen, including Lefty Bay, who is collaborating on the sculpture, will be here to perform later this year. Following Tommy's talk, I'm delighted that he will be joined by Aaron Levi Garvey, the Janet L. Nolan Director of Curatorial Affairs. As I mentioned earlier, this is Aaron's project, and it's really his first major exhibition for Auburn. And we're so delighted that Aaron joined us here and is in conversation with Tommy tonight. My thanks go out to the entire museum staff for the important work surrounding this program, and also for the exhibition, which so many of us have been involved in different ways. I'm grateful to our donors, our seasoned partners, and our unit leadership, the interim provost, Vinnie Nathan, and the office of the provost. Now, please join me to welcome Tommy Coleman.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? Y'all having fun? Cool. Okay, nice. Thank you all for having me here. Thanks for letting me be a part of your community for this whole last week. Big thanks to Ben Sheridan for coming out and making an album that has inspired me for the last year, unwavering, and something I consistently just put on whenever I need to think. I also just want to single out and thank Aaron for having me here and working with me on this idea. And a part of that is that I would like to start off by talking about the concepts that I and Aaron, I believe, say go into this idea of radical naturalism. So let me begin. My name is Tommy Coleman. I'm from South Florida. I have a sense of humor about everything, and I'm very grateful for my family for bestowing that upon me. I'm from a swamp town called Jupiter Farms. And if you can't tell, that is me, my sister who has since passed, Zelda. That is my father with a beautiful stash, and my mother. I also live in Brooklyn, where, the idea of nature is something altogether different and in a conversation that we can have at a later time. But I think it is a crux or a nexus for thinking about what is nature, what is natural, what is a sociological idea of nature. So let me just start off by pinning this down. Naturalism, the philosophical belief that everything arises from natural properties and causes, and supernatural or spiritual explanations are excluded or discounted, which I think is interesting. Radical naturalism, this is an idea that Aaron and I have put together. Observing philosophical, ideological, and artistic ideas and tethering them back to our understanding of nature through sensorial experiences while creating a generative dialogue within communities. Those are the two in and out points, I would say. I think it's really important for me to address the idea and how it's going forward through what is happening currently in our world. We have entered, or maybe have entered, the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is currently an unofficial unit of geological time, used to describe the most recent period in Earth's history, now, when human activity has had a significant, almost irreversible impact on the planet's climate and ecosystems. I have to say that it is not yet solidified or unofficial, because that is scientifically how they consider it, but it has been wavering for the last decade. Personally, rather than talking about sustainability, I subscribe to the concept of ecological interdependency. In order to invoke a sense of responsibility rather than creating a social boundary that denotes chastising the incorrectness of others. I think it's really important that we realize that we are all connected in some ways, whether or not you are thinking about them. So, without further ado, please allow me to explain myself. Where I begin my stories can be confusing, but I always strive for understanding rather than being understood. What you're seeing is an idea of simultaneous contrast. Simultaneous contrast is a color theory idea and refers to the way in which two different colors affect each other. The theory is that one color can change how we perceive the tone and hue of another when the two are placed side by side. The actual colors themselves don't change, but we see them as altered. I also perceive this concept as a sociological idea, a tool for connecting people and the things we witness in the world. My father is a bartender whose passion for their craft and community is pure. My mother utilizes the earth and her garden to hold a dialogue with her surroundings, and she too inspires me every day. They are different, but their passions are the same. They just look different through different values of understanding and comprehension. I will try to explain all of the works, or most of the works that I can within my exhibition. Similar to Audubon, all of my work begins with a moment of searching or hunting for the unknown and unnamed. These are all shot in Brooklyn, not far from my house. This exhibition is a collection of different works spanning over 15 years of my life. I will not discuss them chronologically, but rather as a narrative. I want an audience to slow down and observe them for what they are and how to work, or how they work. In the case of this piece, it's actually not in the exhibition. It's entitled Invasive Thoughts, Fertilized Selfish Landscapes. This work is not featured, but I think is integral to understanding where I'm coming from. Excuse me. This is a wall-mounted sculpture made to resemble some of the notebook drawings that are prominent in my practice. It's also the first time I publicly displayed the invasive potato vines that are so prominent within the galleries that you see today. I often think about how we give carte blanche to the things that we consider as belonging, without ever considering what processes it has gone through in order to sustain or survive. In this ongoing series of sculptures, I consider the elements of line as a tool for navigating space, emphasizing moments where natural or native creations have to do unnatural things in order to prosper or survive. They become drawings in space. They're realizations of something that you will never see elsewhere. At other times, the elements of space become both an idealization or object of socio-political value. When I say socio-political, I mean lowercase s, lowercase p. I don't care to talk about capital P things right now. The value of having or owning a lawn and the maintenance that goes into domesticity in the work Seedbed, I want people to dream. I want people to think. I want people to understand their relationship to a soil or a ground or their ideas of space and what's at home. I want bodies to interact with space as a sensorial experience, not just limited to vision or tactility, smell or sound, but that other underutilized or underrepresented, otherworldly kind of sense, one that just ignites familiarity. Through drawing, I catalyze language and image as one thing. I want a viewer to direct a moment that feels as if it. I want a viewer to experience a moment that feels as if it should be read like a grocery list and observe where they see themselves in it. Sometimes interpretation or misinterpretation of language and its structure gives way to creating vulnerabilities in an audience. In the case of something like this, while some people quivered and felt upset about reading some of these words, I think there's nothing more domestic than the idea of trash night sex. You can laugh. It's a time, it's a place, it's a moment in which we experience the things that we desire, but also feel connected to within the ones we love. Other times I reject language. Similar to Seedbed or another work in the gallery, these drawings renegotiate the traditional ideas of landscape as something else, something interdependent, just as I discussed before. Not just on their own terms of elements, as in, i.e., land and water, but sometimes the self, the fauna, the flora. You look at this and you think of the interconnectivity of two elements, but I really also want you to think about maybe where you triangulate yourself in that. Do you have a connection to home? Do you have a connection to land? Do you have a connection to water? Oftentimes I create maps that illustrate a different understanding of space and territory. In this case, I will finally say that my problem with the vessel is that it has become too slippery of a noun. And for my own artistic practice, I can never locate my own point of origin when considering my ideas. They always feel elsewhere, whether they exist in a memory or are hidden within myself. For a drawing like this, I think of landscape as a space that cannot be entered, but has to be renegotiated through misunderstanding or miscommunication. It's the meandering of nature that doesn't have a place. Other times, the element of space becomes both an idealization or object. Excuse me. In some of my works, these maps have actually been turned inward, like the experience of dissecting a frog, a sometimes traumatizing experience for us in our youths, but for some, a moment of realization of their own physiognomy and their vulnerability. It's through some of these understandings of nature and naturalness that I've curated these 16 prints, and I've renamed them to understand their new attention. In my frog pieces, I want persons to understand that they are an object, but they are also a space. They are interconnected in a way that they have a community. In these prints, I've collaged and correlated different understandings of how to think about the Audubon prints. Through these repositionings, I've retitled them for you to understand what it is that I'm looking at and what I'm seeing, and hoping that you're seeing it too. In the case of these 3 prints, it's Southern Waterline. It is a rising waterline that maybe we think of today, but it is also something for you to think about how these prints work together. It creates a narrative amongst an ecosystem that not normally would be put together. I also will just say that I've picked all of these prints with the notion that they all are very unique, despite being something that is reproducible. For instance, the print on the far right, the heron with the 2 alligators. If you go into the gallery, there's a nice, beautiful little moment where to the right of the dead alligator that's on the bottom right, you will see an outline where Audubon began drawing the alligator and then decided he misplaced it and removed it. It's really faint, but you can find it. I have this notion through my love of Audubon, which I want to say thank you, Chris Malinsky, for having the podcast be done. It's really great. If you haven't gotten the chance to listen to it, I talk a great deal about it. I have this kind of beef with Audubon. I don't know if he's an artist sometimes, and I don't know if he's a scientist other times. In fact, we kind of render them as ideas of science. But meanwhile, I'll tell you that it's secretly a lie. These are ideas of fantasy. Unfortunately, they become more fantastic as time goes on. So in the moments that they're documented, maybe some of them are considered to be real, but I'll prove to you otherwise. In the case of the tree, I think about the interconnectivity of different species of flora and fauna, highlighting different images of plants and animals that would never exist together or in one place. However, in some locations throughout the United States, they do connect today, just because we've moved what we consider to be natural to other locations. We then consider it not to be invasive because we think it's pretty or cute or nice. These adjectives don't mean anything, but I still love them. In other cases, such as Death in Our Underworld, a title that my grandmother would probably chastise me for and say, "Stop being so bleak," I actually think of it as a moment of honesty as well as a sense of humor. I want you to think about having to look at something upside down in order to reorient yourself in a situation. I show you queerness, not capital Q queerness, but a questioned idea of what is going on. In the case of this piece, you have 2 really beautiful prints, a hawk about to kill a rabbit and vultures eating a dead buck. Qualitatively, they're very strange images. The space above them and below them doesn't quite make sense. They become reflections of one another, a before and after almost. However, I think of this as, where do you see yourself? The triangulation might be with the fox. The fox, who's in a moment of terror, something that is stuck in time, is stuck in a terror that we've presented to it. It's stuck in a trap. There's nothing, not man-made about a trap. Trapping is something that we did to it. And I think in this moment in time, this is a print that comes later on in Audubon's life. In it, you will also see a horizon full of a little town. It's also one of his first acknowledgments of people encroaching in. I hope this can become like a point of reflection for some of you. If you could only stop your heartbeat for one heartbeat, is a kind of concept that I think about slowing down. I want you to count and measure. I want you to think about the interconnectivities of these different animals, but also I want you to think about how Audubon has confused the image and confused the viewer by referencing himself. Again, later on in his life, he becomes a poet of his own image making, replicating the same exact blue bird by just copying and pasting it before Photoshop ever existed. It was a means of, I don't want to draw this again, but I need you to see it. A thing that I understand as being very familiar. And it's a different way of me telling you that I'm afraid. Or maybe it's a different way of me telling you I'm scared in a friendly way. Most importantly, though, I'll unveil a few of his lies, or rather just one. This is a painting not in the collection, a painting I love a lot. Has anyone here ever seen this painting by any chance? No? Okay. John James Audubon, Washington Sea Eagle. It was painted sometime between 1836 and 1839. For a 3-year swath of a not so huge painting, it's kind of a funny thing to just have this erupted or disrupted timeline, but so I will take it here that no one has ever seen a Washington Sea Eagle because he made this painting as a way of garnering funds from different collectors. This bird does not exist. This is a lie. This is complete phantasm. There is nothing about this thing that is real. In fact, some people suppose that maybe he decided that he was going to draw an infant eagle and make it bigger in order to scare people. He said it was the largest bird that he has ever seen in his entire life, quoting that it is roughly 4 feet tall and had a wingspan of 12 feet. I call BS. I promised my mom I wouldn't curse. It's these moments of phantasm that I think are really important because while some of my imagery and objects kind of quote other things throughout art history, it's not to quote them, it is to see that I am seeing them. It is to reflect on the moments that I am also experiencing with you. I'm an audience with you. I try to be vulnerable with you because I care about you. I care that you see what I see, and I only feel good when I'm understanding what you're understanding. In moments like this, I try to show you magic. I might not be good at it, but it's all I have. In the case of these two pieces, I will show you that there are moments to reflect upon how you see or understand the world. Excuse me. Fantasy is an idea no longer tethered to the understanding of naturalism, according to naturalism. However, through radical naturalism, we're able to understand that faith or experience or the psychosis of a moment can really seep in. There's times that have been related of my work that feel like they're related to horror, but if they're horror, I think they're soft. I'm not trying to scare you, I'm trying to show you something. In these two pieces, you will hear a sound that emanates throughout the gallery, a sound of what I think of as daytime and a sound of what I think of as nighttime. In them, you will find these moments to reflect upon where I've captured a will of the wisp. A will of the wisp is actually a scientific occurrence in the world called ignis fatuus. It's a glinting of phosphorescent light seen at night, chiefly over marshy ground, and believed to be due to spontaneous combustion of gas from decomposed foliage. I don't know if anyone here has ever experienced that. It's also sometimes the thing that people relate to as like UFOs and things, but it's very real. I've experienced it many times. If I haven't said it yet, the video that's been streaming in the background constantly is actually shot basically in my backyard in Jupiter Farms, Florida. It's in these moments that I get to see moments of magic and hope that there's something else. The idea of the will of the wisp is a ghost that can't be caught, but through my work, I catch it for you, and I want you to see it. Other times, I have to take that moment of magic and turn it in on myself. I become the landscape of something that I've been only experiencing and cannot actually tell you about, but have to try to show you. Sometimes it is fantastical, other times it is less so. Similar to the moments where I talk about my mom gardening, I think about myself, picking weeds or understanding dirt to be something that is similar to myself, an organic matter that goes on, falls apart, and possibly comes back as something else, or so I hope. In the case of this piece, on the left you'll see when it was originally displayed at the end of an exhibition run, where I have used a cast of my hand, incredibly lifelike, after digging in soil, and have taken out a dandelion that I've then embedded inside of myself. If I think of my body as something and think about it interacting with the world, I sometimes think I'm a weed. I'm something that doesn't belong, but I will try to do something and try to be beautiful at the same moment. Other times, my invasiveness is not to be rude, it is to be honest. And in the exhibition, you will see this same exact piece now, 8 years later. The root is still rotting, the foliage is gone, the dream of the dandelion has left, but I think it's still in the ether. It's a moment where I become two things at once. This happens all the time. You do it when you're walking around, when you position yourself and you think about yourself as your child or your mother or your father. It's a moment where you reflect on yourself as something else, the thing that you could never be, but the thing that you love. Sometimes I think of myself as a barrier, but not a bad one that just shows you we need to negotiate our ideas of space. In the case of this piece that exists in the gallery, I think of it as infinite, even though, yes, it's only 2 panels of chain link fence, but it is this idea that when framed correctly through walking into the gallery, you imagine it as going on and on and on and on. It is an idea that these two things, an invasive vine and a denoting or demarking sense of space, have become two things at once. It is not a vine on a fence, and it is not a fence separating you from a space. It is both the vine and the fence and the fence and the vine. There's oftentimes in my work that I wish I was two things at once, and there's oftentimes in my life that I wish I was two things at once. I don't mean to be so personal about it, but it's a real thing, and I imagine we've all felt that way. I want to leave off on just talking about how a lot of these ideas have stemmed from many different points in my life, but a thing that has really inspired me is this idea from Marshall McLuhan is the medium is the message. It's a statement meaning that the form of a message, print, visual, musical, etc., determines the ways in which the message will be perceived. McLuhan argued that the modern electronic communications, including radio, television, films, and computers, would have far-reaching sociological and aesthetic and philosophical consequences, to the point of actually altering the ways in which we experience the world. In this case, I've been experienced and I've been altered. But now I don't use it as a way of unjustly thrusting upon my ideas in the world. I invite you to enjoy them with me. I'm going to have a question and answer with dear Aaron Levi Garvey right now. So please hang out. Welcome to my living room. Thank you. It's really funny having these things in your pocket.
That was great. Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it so far. So I have a couple of questions that we've talked about internally, and then a few that I'm just going to spring on you
That sounds great.
right off the bat.
Just don't make me cry. That's all.
I won't. When coming up with the idea of radical naturalism and drawing parallels between artists that are using nature as a jumping off point or a medium or an inspiration, I fell into an essay by Sidney Gelber entitled Toward a Radical Naturalism. Something that stood out with that was the cycles of birth, growth, and death that impinge upon the human figure and humans as a whole, which are also undercurrents of your work. This was written in 1959. Tell me about the human's impact on nature as you see it from an artist's standpoint.
As I see it from an artist standpoint, that it's, first off, I want to say that I don't mean to be bleak about stuff ever, but I do consider positions that we're in today to be irreversible. The idea of sustainability is kind of like a false narrative. However, we can sustain ourselves within the system by making changes. But that's not necessarily my role as an artist to think about. That's just myself as a person. As an artist, I would say that I constantly go back and forth on this idea of like, maybe if I'm lucky, I'll make 5 great pieces of art my entire life. And that's it, probably. But the best that I can do as an artist is also be an educator and listen to the people that work alongside of me. Oh, is this not, I'm sorry. I didn't kick in here. Yeah, I would like to say that, like, I don't know if anyone heard that. Now that I hear myself, this is terrible. Oh my God. It's interdependencies. I think I answered the question already, but the interdependencies of like me being an artist and like thinking about nature is like, yeah, I know one day I'm gonna die, but I'm going to live and stick around and make sure that like I'm paying attention to what needs to get paid attention to in order to show others. I just don't want to be overly didactic. I want to make sure that people get to experience something and think about their causality in the moment.
I love it. I love your work. I don't think I'm on anymore. But we'll share them.
Oh, okay. Is that better? Yeah. Beautiful. Can you talk more broadly about your journey into being an artist and where that started, where you went full throttle, what's inspired you? I mean, it started, you work in poetry, writing, sculpture, drawing, film, music. And at what point did you realize one of them was dominant or any of them dominant? And how did you navigate that journey?
That's a great question, because I would say that the point of origin is probably somewhere between watching too much Pee Wee Herman and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or somewhere between me going consistently every Saturday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, garage selling with my mother and grandmother growing up. It gave me this interesting idea about materiality and objects and like what gets reused and what is valuable, who is it valuable to? It's like an economy of other people's dreams, and in a weird way. It's like you think about someone's connection to an object, and that becomes really important. That's how I've always thought of the context of myself being a quote unquote sculptor. Technically, my master's degree is in sculpture, so I have to say I'm a sculptor. But I think about objects and I think about material. Another thing that's always changed my life is on Sunday nights, I would go out with my mom after my father fell asleep and go hunt for garbage. Piling in objects. Piling in objects into a back of a truck that I would then later just look at in the yard and think about consistently as the threading on this pipe is so beautiful. How was it made? It later transcended me into thinking about machining and the value of steel versus the value of copper. Both natural materials, but they've been forced into becoming something they weren't. I think that I have never really discerned one way or the other what I am. I'm told I have to say I'm a sculptor, but I don't agree with it. You talk about music, and music does this thing to people that I love. It does something that art can't do. It gets stuck in your head. I had always wished I was a musician more than I was anything else, because as a musician, you occupy space in someone's brain in the way that other things just can't.
Can visual artists be eyeworms, like an earworm song? Can you be an eyeworm?
I think so.
Mindworm?
It's sort of a mind worm. There's been moments for me where it's happened, and the moments in where that's happened for me are also, I'm sorry, I don't mean to harp so much on my own family, but it's like, as a person who has a lot of tattoos, it is the moment where the words have possessed me. I have a lot of language on my body. I have a lot of images on my body. And for me, those are the moments where I need to take the visual with me. It is a token for understanding how I'm going through the world. I don't mean to make people feel disgusted by my altered body, but that is close to that, I would say. Sometimes my art does it, but I don't know if it's always the thing that I can feel. You don't really feel your own ear or eyeworm. Others do, right? I think.
Exactly. So you talked about medium, you talked about the things that you use within your work, what's influenced you. So I'll ask you, what's your relationship to soil? And what is your most intimate moment with nature? Not in nature, but with nature.
My most intimate moment with nature is...
Or has it happened yet?
I don't know if it's happened yet. I can tell you of many. Coming from a place like Jupiter Farms when you're in the swamp, like the idea of soil is something that you kind of learn real quick. For those of you who haven't been there, it's most of it's all dirt roads that are highly compacted, and they're made out of a sand that has shells in it, similar to like a refracted shell that you would find at a beach, but has been like processed. And then in other places, the ground is sandy marsh. It has a dark richness that sometimes also gets kind of oscillated with the clay. I've talked a lot about color tonight at different moments, but I'm very colorblind. In fact, I see most of the world in just yellow. It's really affected me. And I think that is also something that's affected my moments of nature, like the transcendence of seeing a sunset is not something I'm trying to be poetic about. It's just a fact, It's not to take away its beauty. It's just that if you give yourself over to it and you slow down, then that's when time or nature finds you.
I love that. What book are you reading right now?
Well, I just reread White Walling for Kristen's class. Thank you for letting me join. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Aruna D'Souza. Other books that I'm reading right now, I consistently read over poetry books. I'm rereading Ross Farrar's book. It's a book of poetry that just came out. And I highly recommend it to a lot of people. He is like an influential musician, actually, to me. and also grew up in a punk scene, but is someone whose work just pays so closely attention to family and the connectivity that they have to everything around them. And I think that that's just like so beautiful. What are you reading right now, Aaron? If I can ask a question.
We're gonna play ping pong now. Okay. Wow, I didn't think you were gonna ask me any questions. So I'm in the middle of like 3 different books.
I think it's important for us to know this because you and I haven't had this dialogue yet. So this is really good.
Sure. So The Presidents in the Pastime, which is one of my other interests, is sports and history. So it relates to political figures within the sports realm, specifically baseball.
Cool.
It's the book that I wish I had written, that I started researching and thinking about. And then the book came out and I was devastated, and I've started reading it and it's incredible. And it's everything I wish that I came up with in the first place. So
no, that's really important actually. Cause like, that's why I mentioned something like Ross Farrar's book, where it's like the poetry is in these moments where he highlights things like some year in Boston. It's a moment where he talks about what happened in Boston. Sometimes it's related to a family's ailment or something that affected him at that exact moment. And, it makes me think back to other things like, the thing I always talk about, especially with my students, is like I make them read Moby Dick. And the funny thing is like Moby Dick is always this idea of this like one big thing that you're trying to get in the world, this thing that you have like ultimate dreams to. And then if you ask someone who the nemesis in the book is, yes, you can say it's the captain. Yes, you could say it's the whale. But the real nemesis is the sky. The sky is never ending. It's just like the thing that like envelops all
they're
of them.
always sailing into.
That they're always sailing into or away from.
Yeah.
And I love that. I think that's why I merge so much with poetry. It's like the impossible thing to grab.
What's your nemesis?
Ooh. Unfortunately, my nemesis is myself, I think. The other thing that you can tell people is like the trick about Sisyphus is like the man who pushes the boulder up the hill. It's never about the boulder. It's always about the hill, like you can get used to the weight of the boulder, but the hill is never ending. So
it's always uphill.
it's always uphill.
Always going to be uphill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No matter how jacked you get rolling a boulder up a hill, it's still a big hill.
You talked about being 2 things at once.
Yeah.
What are the most recent 2 things that you've wanted to be at once? Is it 2 different people? Is it 2 different places? Is it 2 different things?
I don't know if it's ever a specific thing. There's times where it's specific. There was a phase in my life where I wanted to be Charlie Brown and myself at the same time, but I realized that's a really poison idea. There's other moments where I think like I'm just constantly an animal, and I'm an animal that will never know what my own animalness is, but I am also very much like a steadfast human at the end of the day, or I have to be. It's like the permission that art gives me is the thing for me to recognize that I am 2 things at once. Its specificity is important. But, I think most recently, if I had to be specific, I wish I could be a centaur. But that's just a really blank idea, You think about the fantasy of mythology or something. It's in everything. It's how we explain something. Like the idea of Apollo and Daphne. It's like Daphne becomes the tree, but she's also herself, Those are 2 things at once. That's my example of being 2 things at once.
Okay. What are you working on next? What is your next pie in the sky project? What are you looking forward to now that the show is open to the public? People have seen it. People have read your work, understood your work. It's contextualized. What's your next dream?
This is not yet in the dream realm. I have an exhibition opening this week out west. It's a group show consisting of another hand piece.
Is that the dominant hand that's in that one?
It is, yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. In the exhibition, the hand I refer to as my non-dominant hand, because you'll never really quite understand that you have this relationship with your dominant hand or non-dominant hand. It's almost like one knows you, but the other one doesn't. And it was interesting to have this cast of my non-dominant hand and thinking of it as something that it knows me better than I know it. And that's what kind of like stirred up the weed piece. As for the other piece that is opening this week, it is a piece about finding fire. It's a very like Promethean idea. It is my hand that the palm is going to be constantly on fire. And not in a scary way, but in a way where it feels like you've caught something, similar to the way I talk about catching a ghost.
Like a la Cormac McCarthy in the road and carrying the fire and
Yeah.
carrying that light.
Yeah, carrying, like, how do you
soul.
carry the light or how do you show it to someone? And the gesture is something that looks like this. It's not about having to like conceal it. It's about making sure you can offer it to someone else. As far as dream ideas, it's like I want to be able to create larger scale works now. I'm trying to create things that like take over landscapes. I want to be able to work outside again. My notions of like what happens in a studio have always been kind of changed to happen outside, you know? When I'm in Florida, I don't know if it's clear or not, but I spend a lot of my time in Florida as well as New York. But, you know, it feeds back into me being two things at once. Like if I'm not in Florida, I want to be in New York. And when I'm in New York, I want to be in Florida. I want to understand myself as like something that like sweats, lives and breathes, and then something that like is constantly running from or to something else.
The grass is always greener, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes.
the grass is always greener, but you can not control that.
You mentioned a couple of times throughout your lecture, community, the essence of community, building community, things like that. But what is your definition of community? What does that look like? And this will be my last question, then I'll open it up to everybody else.
Yeah, that's a great question. The idea of community is funny because it's like, who do you care for most, I guess? And the who doesn't have to be actually like a real noun of a group of people. I can use that in a more ubiquitous term. To me, I see community as an audience that you need to recognize you're also a part of. I think of my work a lot of the times as collaborative, even if it isn't always working with other people. I love working with other people. I enjoy being bicameral. I enjoy having like two different kind of ideas going through my brain at the same time in order to have like a community try to show me what is the right thing. In the case of some of the works in there, like I really did think about the casting of those leaves over a long period of time as like, I have to think about the community of like, what is this garden? Where do I find these things? This invasive vine that's destroying my yard, like, is it necessary that I get rid of it? Or can I let that propagate in certain areas? Can it be siloed off? And then do I keep that as a community? Outside of that, I would say being raised in Florida in a punk community, it's kind of like you recognize really early on that your peers are going to be probably people that you know for the rest of your life. There's this funny thing, maybe going back to being an animal. When you grow up in Florida, you are amongst a bunch of older people. It's hard to get around. And then as soon as you see another person who's even remotely your age, it's like you're an animal in a zoo who has seen another creature that looks like you. And you just sit there and you're like, what can we do together? How do we change this? And the funny thing is, even at an early age, it's never for better or for worse. Like, you know, it's like you don't question the morality of it at a youthful age. I feel like that's something that gets set into precedence when you also like know your own mortality. That's later on. So I would say that my community is kind of everything and anyone who's willing to experience something with me. I think that has to be my answer.
That's great. I love it. I'm here for it. Do we have any questions from the crowd? Anyone curious? Did we touch on anything that you're still curious about?
Yeah, I had a different question before, but now I'm more interested in this other one. But do you think your work is punk? Can you talk about that and how it relates to this exhibition?
Yeah. I think, similar to how I said before, I don't want to use a capital P word, but I will say, yeah, sure, why not? Like lowercase p punk is also fine. Like it defines it seeks to redefine or renegotiate your understanding of something. I'm not trying to be didactic. I don't want to tell you how to do something in your life. I want to show you the poetry, the mystery, or the misinterpretation of something. I don't like it when I feel like I'm making a book report and sometimes my punkness comes through and saying like, well, why don't we look at this together and realize that maybe we need to reject the thing that we see in the real world? I'm not trying to say that like you have to. I'm just saying that maybe you can find magic. So I would say that's kind of punk. Yeah. I'm on the urge of being in my mid-30s and I have to say I'm punk. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'll pass the microphone for anybody.
Do I have any material desires? What are we talking like? A big house and a car. This is the first year in my life that I've been like, you know what? I would love to be able to own a house, but that's also just because I want a place to put a table saw. That's how it really goes, My material desires come through in a lot of ways. Yeah, I've got a lot of, not to be this wooey, but like a lot of Taurian desires. I like objects, I like things. But my material desires can sometimes be going through people's trash the same way that I've been doing since I was 5, If I'm inspired by it, then yeah, I'll want it. It's mine. It has to be mine. But the material desires is not punk. It's just like, how can I use this for good? It's like a superpower, right? I think.
Going off of that, I think it might be a good follow-up. I enjoyed the references to Cormac McCarthy and the Moby Dick. So I was curious to hear how do you know in your work when you found the light or like the Promethean fire?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a really good question. There's several answers to that question. The first answer is, does it make me laugh? The second answer is, does it make my dad cry? The third answer is it something that I can stay at a bar late night talking about with someone? And then I think most of all, is it something that I feel the urge to show my students? As someone who is a quote unquote adult, we do this thing to people in their youths where we suppose that they don't know something. And meanwhile, maybe this is me being on the side of working at the Children's Museum of the Arts. I really firmly believe that the older you get, the more you have to learn. And the younger you are, the more you already know. So early on in the conversation, I talked about my willingness or want to find the unknowing or the unnamed. That's more relative to, oh my God, sci-fi writer Ursula Mcguinn. Thank you, Ursula Mcguinn. She has a beautiful story called The Unnamed. And it's her going through the world unnaming things. And then finally getting to the point where she unnames herself. And it becomes this idea that the person who she is with is Adam. And you kind of have this sense, without saying that it is a almost biblical idea, but it is a sense of trying to give up something for yourself or give up something
And that's when I know I've got it. That's why some of the pieces, especially the ones I didn't show, like these notebook series of drawings that I've done them for over a decade now, and it's a moment for me to give something up. The times that I feel bad about that are usually like people want to be involved in my work sometimes, and I can't force that, but I can give you something if I can think deep enough. So that's like the fifth or the fourth point. Yeah. Yeah. Laugh, sad dad, bar, student. Did I give something up? Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Do I need a microphone or can I just shout?
Both.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my question for you is, how would you describe this expedition in one word or like one phrase?
Searching. Just searching. There's a piece I didn't include in here that the funny thing about liking poetry is that I can't even say it off the top of my head or remember things usually for the life of me, but there's a piece in there that you'll see that are these two interlocking circles of text. And the more you look at it, you can start to figure out what it's saying to you. It's also kind of in the title, so it's not like super mysterious, but to me, it's a moment of patience. It's like you got to sit there and look at it. But the more you look at it, you also realize like, oh, I'm also seeing a sunrise and a sunset in two silhouettes. And, you know, like the fence piece, I think of that as like something that is taken out of time. It is that kind of color blue where I found that thing at midnight and that's the way it needs to stay. And the feelings that I find in some of the text pieces, I find at a certain time, and that's where they need to stay also. But I'll let you find them there if you have the patience. So searching.
Tommy, thank you for your work. Thank you for your time tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you for being at Auburn and the Jewel.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many other things we could talk about right
There
now. It's like
are,
weird, like
if
we just sat on stage
everybody wants to
hanging out
take the
with
next
people.
like 5 hours together, we'll go on this journey together. But we have an encore performance that's happening in about 5 minutes. If we would all like to join back out in the courtyard and see the exhibition one more time this evening, or you can come back anytime until July 26th.
Yeah. So I would also just like to say thank you again for everyone and everyone who's like helped me around this week and like let me hang out with them and have a fun time. This has been like so enriching for me and also just like so cool to be a part of this community, meet so many amazing students. It's been incredible what you all do here. And I would just like to gloat to have an inside ear and know the kinds of things that you're planning in the near future, Aaron. And like, we can never predict the kind of conversations that are going to come up. You know, we've been sitting here talking back and forth for months about how I'm enamored by this like field of science behind us talking about cotton or like the tragedy and history of losing a monumental tree in the neighborhood, you know? And the things that you have planned for this place in the future are really exciting. So thank you very much. And it's an honor to be the first person to be here and like get to talk about these things. So awesome.
The hope is that you come back. We want to have all of these artists, and we're talking about communities, having these radical naturalists coming back to the museum, being part of the fabric of Auburn, the fabric of the Jewel, and being a mainstay and a staple within our museum. So not just their art, but them as people. So you'll be here more often.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.